Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is the third session of our Spirituality, Faith, and Religion, creating a time and space for connection, wellness, and hope for healthcare providers. Just some housekeeping information to start. Participant microphones will be muted at entry, but you will be able to unmute during the discussion portion of our session later on. If you do have any question, you can always ask it out loud or just raise your hand and I will unmute you, or you can unmute yourself. Either way works. This session is being recorded and it will be available on our website tomorrow. If you have any questions during the session, please use the chat or just wait until the end and you can unmute yourself. And if you do have any questions after today's session, please email newengland@mhttcnetwork.org. And this is our disclaimer for the New England MHTTC. We are funded by SAMHSA. This will be presented on our website. Well, the slides will be posted on our website, so you can read this in more detail. As well as this, the MHTTC network uses affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all of our activities. The New England MHTTC, in our mission, is to use evidence-based means to disseminate evidence-based practices across the New England region. Our area of focus is recovery-oriented practices, including recovery support services within the context of recovery-oriented systems of care. Our guiding principles. And again, just to reintroduce everyone, this is their Spirituality, Faith, and Religion webinar, session 3. And I'll be handing it off to our moderator, Thomas Burr. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Vanessa. And welcome, everyone. My name is Thomas Burr. I'm the Community and Affiliate Relations Manager for the Connecticut chapter of NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And it is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce to you tonight for this afternoon our panel. In no particular order here, I'm going to introduce to you Babalu, and I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher this and I apologize. Babalu Anru Hafkeni, and please feel free to correct me if I'm really butchering this, and I apologize. He has been a Babalu within the West African Orisa religious tradition of the Yoruba people for over 20 years. He is a clinical social worker, an artist, and an activist. He is a multiracial, Black, cisgendered, heterosexual man, a father of 2, and has been married for more than 21 years. Anru has also been living sober for over 28 years. It is this weaving together of spiritual health, mental health, and social justice issues and practices that guides his life and work with others. So welcome. Our next panelist is Norman J. Newton, Jr., Senior Minister, New Haven Church of Christ. Norman is a native of Cambridge, Maryland. He holds an Associate of Arts degree from Chesapeake College. Norman is also a graduate of Ambridge University, formerly known as the Southern Christian University, where he obtained his Bachelor of Science degree in Bible ministry, and he graduated summa cum laude. Norman served at the Cambridge Church of Christ as the assistant minister and youth minister for several years. At the Capital Church of Christ, he assisted with the youth ministry, teaching the high school teens and preaching the gospel. Norman has served as the senior ministry of the Church of Christ in Easton, Maryland for the past 6 years. Norman currently lives as the senior minister at the New Haven Church of Christ in New Haven, Connecticut, where he has been serving in the capacity for the last 4 years. And last but certainly not least, Reverend Bonita Grubbs, who is the executive director of Christian Community Action since December of 1988. She was ordained to the Christian ministry within the American Baptist Church in November of 1987. From 1985 to 1988, she was employed as Assistant Regional Administrator in Region 5, Northwest Connecticut for the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services within the state of Connecticut. She has served as a board member of the Connecticut Housing Coalition, the Hospital of St. Raphael, the Greater New Haven Community Loan Fund, and the International Festival of Arts and Ideas. She has also served as a member of the Judicial Review Council for the state of Connecticut, as well as the interim pastor of Christian Tabernacle Baptist Church in Hamden, Connecticut, and president of the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness, co-chair of New Haven's Fighting Back Project's Steering Committee, member of the Board of Trustees of Mercy Center in Madison, Connecticut, the Connecticut Center for School Change, and Dwight Hall at Yale University. She's also served as a lecturer in supervised ministries and homiletics at Yale Divinity School and the president of the American Baptist Church of Connecticut. She has also served as a board member of the Connecticut Voices for Children, Project Access New Haven, the Community Economic Development Fund, and chair of the ABCON's Personnel Committee. Presently, she serves as a board member of the Regional Workforce Alliance. And while I've been reading this, did Pastor Marcelo Centano Jr. join us? I don't have it on my screen here. I'm looking. Yeah, unfortunately, I think he was called away at the last minute. All right, so with that, and unfortunately, he's not going to be able to join us. So thank you, everyone, for coming today. And I'm going to ask a series of questions to our panelists. And as I ask the questions, I'm encouraging our panelists to certainly weigh in not only on the question that I asked, but if one of the previous questions resonates with you for some reason, or you have something you'd like to add to expand on the previous person's comments, by all means, please weigh in. We're going to be very open with this, very free-formed, and we'll go for about the next half an hour, and then we're going to leave a good 20 minutes for Q&A. So if you have a question there of one of the panelists or one of the topics, please feel free to ask it or put it in the chat, and we'll make sure we ask it of the panelists. So without any further ado, again, welcome everyone, and I'm going to get right into the questions here. And the first question I'm going to pose to Anru. And again, I apologize from earlier if I really butchered everything, but thank you and welcome. All right, the first question is, how important is spirituality and faith to our life during this COVID pandemic?
Well, good afternoon, first of all, to everyone who's joining. So my title is Babalu. But you got the rest of my name great, Anru Halfkenny, so I appreciate that also. So Babalu is like translation like a priest. So I'm a priest in this West African tradition. So spirituality and religion and faith, to me, is always important. It is not particularly more important during a pandemic or during a crisis. In my tradition, we really look at things in a holistic way. So, there's the interconnectedness of our spirituality, our faith, our religious practices, our connection to our ancestors and the divine. But there's also our physical health and well-being, which is vital and central, right? If we're not alive and well, nothing else is going to happen. Our relationships are important. Our mental health is important. And so all of these things combined are vital. But, I'm a priest because I really love being in this particular relationship with my ancestors and the divine, and then, have training to work with other people to help them develop their relationship with these forces. So it's crucial. And a piece that I want to, I think, highlight, because I'm very well aware that the Orisha tradition is not something that most people know about. And so the aspect of it that I just want to highlight is, in this tradition, just like many indigenous traditions, we see our relationship with our ancestors continue even after their passing. And we have practices as a part of our faith to engage in that relationship, both for our support, for our healing, for the unfolding of our lives. And so that's an explicit part of this tradition. So I, I have found, particularly during this pandemic for many people, remembering that and engaging in that relationship with their ancestors has been important because they really see, oh, I'm not alone. And when we tap into this massive collective wisdom of our ancestors, they have lived through challenges. They've lived through pandemic. They've lived through genocide. They've lived through tragedy. Right? They've lived through these things. So while I feel it's always important, engaging in these practices can be a little bit more helpful. When things are really rough, we lean into the practices a little bit more so that we understand our interconnectedness with those we love, our ancestors, and our relationship to the divine.
All right, thank you so much. And I appreciate the idea of kind of widening your perspective, because I think sometimes we get too caught up in just focusing on our own stuff sometimes, and having that greater perspective can put things in a better context sometimes. So I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, our next question is for Minister Norman. What experiences have most shaped your faith during the pandemic? And as a follow-on question to that, what is the message to share with your community?
I'd like to say good afternoon to everyone. I bring you greetings from the New Haven Church of Christ, and want to thank MHTTC for the opportunity to be able to be on this program with such a great panel. Grateful for all the panelists and the moderator as well. And to address that question, COVID-19 impacted me personally. I contracted COVID-19 in March of 2020. I was kind of debilitated for about a week's time. Fortunately for me, I was not hospitalized, but COVID definitely became personal. And being a church leader, trying to help individuals navigate, as well as myself, trying to lead a church during pandemic was definitely challenging. It was definitely a growth process. When we look at the particular maze of fear, death, governmental restrictions, COVID has challenged many's belief system to the core. But I can tell you it's my faith in Christ and my faith in God that has been my anchor throughout the course of this time. When you look at the death tolls of masses of people who are dying on a daily basis, I had to perform. There were so many changes that had to take place. How we grieve, the grieving process had to change. Had to perform funerals during the midst of COVID, and never thought there would be a time I was outside having to do. They had a drive-by to actually view the casket on the outside, and they were restrictions from the funeral directors to say, at the conclusion of the funeral, there should be no touching throughout the course of this time because things were at its peak. And to watch individuals who needed to be consoled but unable to be touched due to the fear of all of these things, that was paralyzing to many. When we think about the many changes that we have to learn how to even worship different, something which is such a free-flowing expression, something that was done on a natural basis. Now we're coming into what is considered a new normal. I know currently in our congregation, we're still wearing the masks and doing the temperature checks. But that freedom of expression that we were used to had been hampered in many ways. I found that we need that intimate connection with individuals is so important. The communal fellowship with brothers and sisters or individuals is needed. I also found that that isolation was leading more and more people into depression. Including in some of our congregants. The importance of having a spiritual connection with others, having your foundational faith, which is mine, in the person of Jesus Christ. That was the anchor that helped me to be able to navigate through such a difficult time. As a song says, he's a rock in the weary land and he's a shelter in the time of storm. And it's also important to be able to have a support group. I use the expression all the time in reference to our local congregation. The church is not a country club for saved people, but it's a hospital for those who need help. The church is a big support group, if you will. And it's important to know that others are praying for you during times of difficulty, or others are there to have a word of encouragement when you may be feeling down. And I think we all need that other extension from other human beings as well.
Yes, no, and I appreciate that, and I'm glad to hear that it sounds like you've recovered fully from the illness.
Yes.
Not everyone does. I've got a good friend in the mental health advocacy community who's one of the quote unquote long haulers, and she's back to work, but not at full strength. And it's really, there's been a lot of loss during this time. But you made a couple of good points, I think, with the whole idea of that loss of connection. We are human beings and we need that connection, and we don't have that. That is definitely felt as a loss and can be something that can add to people's depression. And in fact, here at NAMI, pre-pandemic, we were always known for saying, 1 in 5 Americans is dealing with a mental health condition. Well, during the pandemic, and still
Wow.
to this day, it's more like 1 in 3. And we used to say everybody knows somebody. Now we say everybody's living with somebody.
Right.
It's that common, which the only silver lining to that is the whole idea that it's, I think, helped to get rid of some of the stigma around mental health, because everybody is dealing with it or knows someone intimately who is. So I appreciate your perspective on that. Thank you. All right, now we're going to switch over to Reverend Bonita. Your question is, how do you find balance between loss and well-being?
So I have to apologize, but and I'm not going to show her on camera, but there's this lovely young girl who knocked on my door and I could not let her in. I won't show you, but I think that one of the things that I can say as Director of Christian Community Action is that we have continued to serve individuals and families during the pandemic. And so our job was to really put our principles of offering help, housing, and hope to individuals who were coming in for food but couldn't come in our doors. Our shelter was closed. We are allowed for our shelter to be renovated during that period of time. So really, very specifically and succinctly, I can say we just kept on doing what we've done and to try to do what we could do specifically to help individuals and families in need.
Yeah, and that
And
ability.
there's more than I can say, but that's really the gist of it. And I am grateful for the opportunity to share. And I'm going to put myself not on mute again, unless there's a follow-up question that you want to ask me, and then close off my screen so I can say hi to my little friend.
All right, well, we're going to circle back around to you in a few minutes with another question, but for right now,
Right, so
go do what you need to do.
Yeah, well, this is at the heart of the work. So I'm doing the work while I'm talking to all of you. That's a part of the process. You
No
do
worries.
what you can.
All right, and I appreciate you sharing on that. And yeah, we certainly, as our organization, we had to pivot when the governor, basically shut the state down, and we went from doing everything face to face to everything virtual.
Sure.
In a real quick manner. We all got up on Zoom and all learned how to use it, and literally put all our different programming, our support groups and our education classes and all our community outreach on Zoom, which wasn't easy for some people. If you weren't real computer literate, it was a big challenge. And some people, it took longer than others to get up to it. But we literally shut our office down on a Thursday and we're running support groups the following Monday. So online. So you just had to do what you had to do. And thank God we had this wonderful technology. It's not the same as being face to face, but it has allowed, at least for some level of connection, even though it's not a physical connection, but at least we can still stay connected, because it's the isolation certainly that does have a negative impact on people's mental health. So I really appreciate that. So all right, we're going to circle back around and I'm going to try to get it right this time. Babalu. No,
Whoa.
Babalawo.
There you go.
All right, I got it right once.
That's all right.
Oh man. How do we deal with loss during the storm? Many deaths for a long period of time without family and loved ones around us.
So I think I want to kind of start with some of the themes that have come up already, just in terms of like how people stay connected. So just for context, so the Orisha tradition, it's rooted in and came out of West Africa, from the Yoruba people in West Africa. And then because of the institution of slavery, those practitioners were then brought over to this part of the world. And depending on where they landed, you had these kind of different diasporic practices came. Right? So you have candomblé out of Brazil, Santeria and Lucumi out of Cuba. There's also Umbanda out of Brazil. So different places in the Caribbean, particularly where African practices were maintained. There's an explicit development of the Orisha tradition, but they're different branches, similar to like there being different denominations in Christianity. And so it has survived from then to now, mostly in secret, right? These are like practices that people have had that have been persecuted both by the systems of oppression, and then because of colonization and all of these things, which have really, the pressure was to really eliminate these indigenous African practices. And even here in the United States, much of the kind of outward facing part was destroyed, but you have these cultural aspects which are maintained, right? So people, I like to say, and people can, obviously those who are in the church have their positions about it, but I like to say the reason the Black church is the Black church is because of Africa, right? So we have these African sensibilities and culture that comes in to inform even how Christianity is practiced and understood. But back to this piece around like our ancestor reverence, which is this fundamental piece. Regardless, of our religious practices, we all have ancestors, and so the pouring of libations, the people have in their homes, a mantelpiece with the pictures of their ancestors that they honor. Maybe they light a candle. These all come from this now culturally embedded understanding that our relationship continues. And so because of that, even when we physically can't be with another loved one, there is already this understanding that we can also access support, both our relationship with our ancestors and the divine themselves, the Orisha themselves, in a practice. Thankfully, one of the things we were kind of allowed and encouraged to do during the pandemic was to be outside. It was one of the few places, even early on, we could be outside. And the other piece about this tradition is fundamentally a nature-based system. So we connect with the divine in nature and through nature, right? There's sacred rivers, sacred mountains, sacred places. And so we can be in those places and feel them, right? Feel our ancestors, feel the divine. And even when we can't literally reach out to touch the person, either who's passed or a person in our family community who we want to be close to, and we can't because of a pandemic, we can still be embodied and feel and connect with these forces and feel the support, feel the grief, feel the loss, because that's normal. That's what it means to be a human being, but also to remember that there's a life that's also larger than the circumstances that we're in. This is the same thing that helped us through, African heritage people through slavery, right? Oh, there's life and existence that is greater than and more important than only the circumstances that we're in. The circumstances are dehumanize us, yet we know we are human and we can connect with practices that maintain that and strengthen that. We know this pandemic is affecting us and afflicting us, and we know we're still connected to life and community and to people around us. And so in my therapy practice, as soon as things shut down, I was able to switch pretty easily to this medium, right? Doing things online. And it also meant that I was able to connect with people in this tradition who are not right around me. This tradition doesn't have the same kind of social infrastructure and support that many other faiths do. I can't go to divinity school here and kind of have my faith there and my practice there, and institutions hold me in a certain way. And so the structure is much less formal, but is still important. And so as more and more people went to Zoom, right, I could actually reach more people than who weren't physically here, who I normally would be working with. And so I could do classes, I could teach, I can support people in their practice. This is a tradition that most people don't know, don't understand, right? But there's like a yearning also that people have for something about my heritage, something I want to know, something, right? I'm yearning for something. And so I was able to really support people in that. Let me support you in your practice and your connection with the divine, your connection to your people. You don't have to go through me as a Babalu, as a priest. I'm like a specialist, right? But really, the analogy I use is, we can all learn to like work on our car, but at some point we need to take it to the mechanic, right? Because that's like what they do. And it's a similar way. Like we all have a connection to the divine. We all have a relationship and a path there. We all have a connection with our ancestors. And I'm just helping to give people some tools to move in that direction, right? Or maybe there's just other training I have that can help people. And so even as people are physically distant, there's still practice, there's still engagement that we can do. And I was also surprised, even as a therapist, how effective kind of virtual work is. Right? There was really a seamless shift into it. And I got new clients during it, right? I maintained clients during it. It wasn't the like, now this is virtual, there's nothing here. People feel it. People, because the connection is theirs, right? It's not not connected to me, but it's me helping other people, right, find this place and these practices and these connections within themselves.
Yeah, and you make a really good point about the technology, because it was a big concern as an organization if people were still going to be able to maintain those connections with their providers. And what we've come to find out is that it actually improved things for a lot of folks. I had been in some meetings with some providers who said their no-show rate, which was typically 30 or 40% back in the face-to-face days pre-COVID, went down to practically zero, because people could connect from their homes. They didn't have to find transportation. They didn't have to find a sitter. They didn't have to take time off of work. If they were at work, they could just kind of go into a conference room somewhere. And it really helped people maintain that connection with their therapist or counselor or what have you. So that was really a very helpful thing for the people that we work with in the mental health world. Another thing that I just want to briefly touch on before we go on is that you mentioned, being outside and connecting with nature. As someone who still actively facilitates a family support group, I often recommend to the caregivers that I talk about, it's a caregiver support group, that you want to encourage your loved one who might be struggling with their mental health. Don't go hole up in your room, even though that's maybe what you feel like doing. Get out into nature. There's absolutely, and research has backed this up, a real positive from being out in nature, being around trees for some reason is really helpful to people. And again, I think it's, as you touched on, it's that unseen spiritual connection with nature and the creator that exists out in nature that you don't get sitting in your room. So thank you for
Remind
that.
me of a couple of things. I'll just add in. One, for example, is like going to the ocean. So the ocean is a divine being, is an Orisha, but also you go to the ocean and there's this huge expanse. And if you let yourself be connected to that, right, this experience of like, oh, I know I have all my problems, but like, wow, the world, this being is so vast, right? And even though I'm like all tied up in my own problems, there's also space that like life and existence is also more than that. And so it's a way to help, we can get right in the room so wrapped up in our stuff that it's hard to see that anything else is possible. And that's also a real benefit. I go between here are these spiritual connections and here are these kind of mental health things, and some are distinct and some are really really wrapped up together. The other thing I'll say about virtual things is, even with the spiritual work I was doing with people, it gave me a window into their lives, which normally I don't see. Right? Normally we have people come to us, and this was like, oh, now I actually in their space, and like, oh, how are things there? And now it's like I'm the visitor. I'm being welcomed into their home versus them kind of coming to me. And a very interesting changing and dynamic occurred with that.
Certainly.
Which is really powerful and really healing.
All right. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
All right. Next question to Minister Norman. Are gratitude and spirituality protective factors against emotional distress?
I believe they definitely can be. I, like I like to say a lot of times, what we focus on determines our ultimate outlook. So if a person focuses on their fears will continue to grow. But if a person focuses on their faith or their gratitude, these things will grow as well. Some of the things that I had to express to our congregants and those I was associated with, and I am associated with, was that sometimes you have to turn off the television. I mean, around the clock, more death tolls, more infections, these rates. And before you know it, we're overwhelmed by the data, we're overwhelmed by the information. And before you know it, we're afraid to go outside. The fear factor begins to, take over in many cases. Also trying to recommend to people that are experiencing hardships to be able to focus on not only what's wrong, which is the easy part to do, but focus on what's right, the things that are currently going well in your life. Starting a gratitude journal. That's something as simple as, you just taking notations based on the small things that are going well. I woke up this morning. My children are healthy. I'm currently employed. I have a means of transportation. I do have the activity of my limbs, those particular faculties, and continue to log these things along with, greater accomplishments. But later on, when you find yourself in those low points and those difficult days, you have pages and pages and pages to be able to refer back to that can help you come out of that depression or that funk that you may find yourself in, and continue to add to that particular list. As we mentioned previously, even during the height of the pandemic, our church, we realized not being able to come together physically, and even through the course of Zoom, everything we pretty much did in a physical fashion. We turned our ministries online. Even in our small groups, we just continued to meet. But we realized people needed prayer time. We started a prayer call 2 times a month. And also, even in the midst of going through this time, as Grubbs had mentioned previously, we're called to serve. And we were contacted by our local alder in reference to the need, in reference to food insecurity. We had a pantry that ran originally during the pandemic, but we had shut down for 2 months. It was primarily run by the seniors in our church. But as a result of us understanding the need, we got together and we talked with our leadership and others, and I just put a rally cry out to our church. Some were actually unemployed at that time, and everybody came together. So we had young people, teenagers, varying ages within our congregation, up to maybe 30 people. And we've continued to serve from April of last year, twice a month, feeding numerous amounts of people. So even in the midst of this time, sometimes serving can help you shift the focus off of yourself to really also seeing the other dynamics and needs of others. And that could be helpful in your rehabilitation in process. And just a shout out, I know part of this focus is for healthcare professionals. My wife's RN Cornell at Cornell Scott, and we would not have made it this far. We know God has used these servants in the health field to be able to help individuals to be able to get on the mend and process through these times.
And God bless her for her service during this pandemic. And you bring up a good point, and it's interesting because I seem to see this often as a thread with people who struggle with either, a spiritual crisis or a mental health crisis, is that they feel disconnected, and a lot of times it's just that narrow focus on just their own situation.
Sure.
And the better that someone can widen that focus out
Sure.
to see the bigger picture, whether it's through a gratitude journal or in service to others, that is a great ladder out of these dark holes that people sometimes find themselves in. And it's just, it's easy to say,
Yes,
but it's not always easy to do when you're down in that dark hole. But
that's
it's that human connection, I think, that helps people start that process. And that's something that, I'm always recommending to the caregivers is, someone can be in a bad place, but do try to connect with them, because it's the human connection that'll ultimately help start that journey back to a better place. So thank you for that. All right, we're going to go back to Reverend Bonita. Thank you for rejoining us. And What is the role of gratitude in spiritual well-being?
Well, I think that one of the things that I understand is that there is indeed a high degree of gratitude to God for being able to be in a position to serve. Each one of us in our own different ways has a ministry and a message and a mission. What's what's for CCA is different than what a congregation or a therapist might, but there's still similar ways in which we can think about the work that we are doing. And imagine, and I'm not suggesting that this is going to happen, but imagine if the three of us were not in our positions, or there were congregations that had decided that they wanted not to be able to do the things that they knew that they couldn't do, or to adapt to the kinds of virtual ways in which to connect it, to feel a sense and find a sense of community. Those are really very important missions. And it's not self-serving at all. It's about creating a community of care, a community of support, a community of presence. And presence is critical, particularly at a time when you are separated, isolated. So I have found opportunities, just like I told you about the young lady. She's 6 years old. She has brought joy to my spirit and a smile to my face. And there's nothing better than to have that kind of unexpected opportunity to be able to be lifted above the pushing of paper, the challenges of remaining open, the opportunities that we do not have to connect with the people we serve in the ways in which we have. But we make the opportunity, there are opportunities to adapt to what it is that we can do and how we can serve and how we can be present. That for me has made all of the difference in the world. I don't look at faith as something that is static, it is practice. I don't look at spirituality as something that is far off in the distance. It's about the ways in which you absolutely put what you believe into a daily form of engagement, of encouragement, of invigoration, of connecting with individuals in a fashion that you believe that you can do. And all of us, no matter what our positions are, we still have families that we have to pay some attention to, and there are needs there. So having the ability and the energy and the inspiration, and I think the fact that we have what we have in the way of a connection with God is really quite important. I'll give you a small example, and it's a song that actually came to mind as Norman was talking. I don't know what you have in store, but I want to thank you, God, because thank you makes room for more.
I like
And I
that. I
think
really
that
do.
for me, that is a critical piece of how we turn, the darkness into day, the challenges into opportunities. It's really being thankful for being chosen as a servant. And I don't mean that in any way as if we are in any exalted position. We are a servant saved by grace is what the scripture says. And I think that is indeed critical for us to remember and to practice and to really take the time to celebrate the fact that we are indeed able to bring that light into places of darkness. And that really encourages me each and every day, even if it's in no other way than just a smile. And yesterday, running around with a child.
No, I really love that. That was really beautiful. And you are absolutely right. It is a blessing to be in a position where you are able to serve and able to help people out of the darkness. That's just wonderful. And it's what keeps me energized in this work because I can share some of the things I've learned along the way, and hopefully something that comes out of my mouth will help someone on that path back to a better place. So thank you for that. And you're right about children too. I have a granddaughter who'll be 6 in a couple of months, and they do give you a brand new perspective on things, and sometimes when you really need it. So I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, we're going to go back to Babalu. What did you learn during the COVID-19 crises?
Thank you. I actually want to. So part of this really touches upon what both Sir Newton and Ms. Grubbs have spoken about in this piece around like staying connected to the things that are life affirming, because those are always also here. And so, for me, that might be in the experience of what I was saying, like going outside and being in nature, going by the ocean. It's like, oh, like there's something here that's greater than me, right? And regardless of your faith, right, we can have that experience, right? It happens to be, central, like, oh, here's the ocean, it's Olokun, it's this divinity, right? And the experience of that expansiveness, which we can actually also do when we look up, right? Oh, the sky. I've been recently thinking of it as the sky is just the ocean of the air, right? If we can like tune into that expansiveness, we can also connect to those life affirming things, which particularly as a spiritual leader, as a mental health care practitioner, right, who someone works with other people, my own wellness is also important. It's not for me to sacrifice my life for the people I'm working with, right? What happens if I actually engage? I can make sacrifices, right? And that's an important part of my tradition is, change is the order of the day. To create the peace that we want, we have to make sacrifices, right? We are making sacrifices here. We're showing up. We want to have this conversation. We could be doing other things, right? But this has some meaning and some value, just in that simple way. And so we ourselves need to also be well, right? And I say this to many other people who care for others. It's so easy in our culture, for many reasons, to say like, no, you be well. I'm going to keep moving. I'm going to push through. I can't stop. And if we do that, it's also in terms of people doing justice work, we are then creating a world where we don't get to be well in. And that is insane, right? And so how do we find the balance of being well and giving and caring for so many other people, right? But that's a challenge. But let us be with that challenge versus, in some ways, the ease of just pushing through our own grief and our own struggles. Oh no, I got to show up for them. I got to show up for them, right? And then we forget ourselves, which then has an impact, as a mental health provider, burnout, compassion fatigue, however we want to call it. And then we're not actually connected to the very life, the life itself that we're trying to bring other people to be connected to. So that's one thing that kind of stands out. The other is, this is not just about the individual. If we look at even the early approaches to COVID and like the mask wearing, there was one viewpoint of US culture, popular culture was like, wear the mask, be safe. Yet part of the reason to wear the mask is so that other people are safe. Right? And that was a fundamental piece in terms of the larger culture, which was not held, right? It was like, no, if I'm okay, which then meant like people could say, well, I feel like I'm okay, so I won't wear a mask, which puts and doesn't consider other people's wellness. Maybe the person you pass, maybe the person you're sitting with, the system is compromised, right? Their immune system is compromised. But because of the culture, we rarely are holding that as much of a value, right? It becomes this like, well, I'm okay, so I'm going to put it on or off, versus, whoa, let me do this for other people's wellness as well. Even if I'm healthy, I don't want to be a carrier, even if I don't get symptoms, right? But that part wasn't as kind of promoted as a part of how we relate to ourselves, which is this piece of the importance of community. And with that, the acknowledgement that there are also systems at play so that certain people get more sick than other people, right? So we're in a system that disenfranchises people of color, disenfranchises poor people. And so not just because this one individual is doing a thing or not doing a thing, but there's structures in place that certain people get care, certain people are not getting care. And so it's also important, and it's been important for me in all the layers of work that I do, to also really talk about those things, right? We're talking about systems, people who are homeless, much more at risk, right? How do we address the systems that are putting them there? How do we address the system? Why are Black and brown people more susceptible? Oh, is it because we're Black and brown? Well, no, it's because of these circumstances and this system that we're in, that we don't have certain access to health and well-being from the cradle to the grave, right? We're struggling against those things. And so it's been important for me in my religious practice and my communicating with other people and working with these divine forces and our ancestors, how do we also, right, continue to live, have these life affirming relationships and qualities, even while these circumstances, highlighted in the pandemic, but as the pandemic goes down, these systems are still in play, which we still have to wrestle with. Right? We're still wrestling with justice. We're still wrestling with what does it mean to be a whole person? What does it mean, as Reverend Grubb said, like to be connected to our purpose? Right? If we're struggling just to eat, it's very difficult to be connected to a sense of purpose, place, and even belonging. And so these things are really important, both for, for all of us, like wherever we are on the spiritual and religious practice, wherever we are in the mental health, physical health, support and practice. How do we also understand that it is not just, this one individual has their one particular suffering, but it is also part of these systems that are at play. And so how do we create communities and systems to be free? Not always just to fight that thing, but to be free, to move towards health, wholeness, and liberation, and all these, right? Spiritually, physically, emotionally, mental health, relationally, work, like all of these things. There's so much that we miss, that we can't hold, because so many messages are coming at us about not being enough in one way, shape, or form. And so COVID highlights that, but it didn't create those things, right? It just put a strain on a system that was already we're already suffering, right?
Right.
Even as it's important that I fundamentally believe I'm here because I believe in life. I believe in purpose. I believe in my connection to the divine and to my ancestors, and that there is that is greater than the particularities of my life. And so I can draw on these forces and my ancestors who lived through that also to be like, how do I keep going? Oh, my people are dying. Like my grandmother or my neighbor, I'm depressed, I'm isolated. How do I keep going? And there's collective wisdom and encouragement, yes. And life is still important. It's important to find your way of being here as a whole person as we can.
Yeah, and you had raised an interesting point earlier about the whole idea of self-care. We often touch upon that in our support groups. I'm always telling the caregivers, especially, self-care is not selfish. You cannot pour from an empty cup. So I appreciate you touching on that. At this point, I'm actually going to, because I'm looking at the time, I want to make sure we have time for questions. I'm going to table the very last question that sharing a positive message for the future. I'm going to table that to the very end and then give you all three a chance to briefly touch on that. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. And Vanessa, I don't know if you can keep an eye on things for me here. I'm looking in the chat, and I don't see a question so much as a comment, a couple of comments that I'm going to read. But certainly, if you do have a question, I believe, Vanessa, people can unmute themselves.
Yes, I have enabled that feature, so people are allowed to unmute themselves if they do have a question.
All right, so I'm going to just read these quick two comments, and then if you have a question, weigh in here. First comment is, it's so important to be understanding, specifically in the mental health field. Latinx and Hispanic communities have these feelings as part of our life. Mental health providers need to learn about feelings. There's a bunch of thank yous in there too to the panelists, so thank you for that. Someone else feeling of life is so important and very important to create systems and communities that all people are welcome. That whole thing of collective wisdom. So thank you, Graciela, for adding that. At this point, does anyone in the audience have a question? We can't see you, so if you can just shout it out, that's fine. No questions. Wow. Well, then I'm going to do this. If someone does have a question and you don't feel comfortable saying it, feel free to put it in the chat. Otherwise, then let's go to because we only have about 10 minutes left here. And I do want to make sure we have time to answer this last question, which is share a positive message for the future. And I'm going to start with you, Minister Norman, if you could share a positive message for the future as we wind up here. Oh, you're muted.
Time I'll do that. I just wanted to, if I could, just take a minute to talk about just a few things that I learned in reference to this season of COVID that I think that's worth highlighting. My hope has been strengthened and restored in the resolve of the human spirit in the midst of all the evil that's going on in the world. But when COVID struck the masses, we all began to come together. I take my hats off, especially to the healthcare community who work tirelessly around the clock, shift after shift, putting in the work so that resources could be had, so others could be ministered to and served in the way that they needed to. And I find that to be so important. I have a member of my church, they worked at the coroner's office in New York when, you had masses of bodies in tractor trailers. And he talked about going from Connecticut into New York, and a lot of times the subway, nobody was on the rail, and how lonely that is. But then to have the drive to continue to go on because service needed to be done. There were those who still needed to be served. Just like I talked about our congregation, when we realized that a large group of our congregation was seniors who was leading our food pantry. And I looked to the younger group and said, hey, unless everybody can carve out some time, that people still need to be fed. And individuals found ways in their schedule to be able to meet the needs of other people. And this what this thing is really all about. And I just wanted to share, positive word to all of those who may be listening. It's important for us to let others know it's okay to not have it all together all the time. It's okay to feel like you can't be strong every moment of the day, because no one is. I like to begin every message at a home congregation with, if you have a pulse, that means God still has a purpose for your life. Even though the course of loss, the loss of loved ones, you had somebody very close to you pass away, even when they passed along, your purpose did not pass along with them. If God raised you up, you still have the ability to be able to live on purpose. With God, all things are possible. And there's an expression that's always said, if he'll bring you to it, he has the ability and the power to bring you through it. What gives me hope as a Christian minister is that we don't know what tomorrow is going to hold. Nobody saw COVID coming. There's no way to calculate the devastating effects or impacts that it has. But my faith is anchored in the Lord. And the expression is, I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I know who holds tomorrow. And that gives me hope for the future. And prayerfully, everybody can operate in a positive fashion and continue to be there for their fellow man and for one another. God bless.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Reverend Bonita, do you have a positive message for the future you'd like to share?
There is so much inspiration from my two colleagues that I found a verse of scripture that I'm going to find the source for. But I remember hearing a question: how can I sing the Lord's song in a strange land? And I think that I attempted to answer the question by a biblical search, because I wanted to answer the question about, so what do you do in the midst of madness? And what does the New Testament and Old Testament combined say about what's the middle verse? And so here's the middle two verses, because there are two of them. Praise the Lord, my soul, all my inmost being. Praise God's holy name. Praise the Lord, my soul, and forget not all God's benefits. And I think as bad as things can be, one, it could be worse. And as bad as things can be, we are people of hope, and we can hold on to that hope as we hold on to the unchanging hand of the Almighty. The other thing, and Minister Norman has put me in the place of usual practice, which is alliteration. And so here's some keys that I want to leave by way of inspiration. One is, we have the resource of prayer. from our various traditions. And there's conversations that we can have with the Holy One that can give us the inspiration or the peace that we need. And sometimes I say that passes all understanding, because I don't know how it works. I just know it does. Each one of us has a purpose, and it's our task, even in the midst of all difficulties and challenges, that we have that God-fulfilling purpose in our lives. And that helps us to overcome many of the challenges. Well, there is praise, and I mentioned the praise already. And someone used to say, thank you makes room for more. And the power that is within us, not because of who it is that we are, but whose we are, that makes all of the difference. At the beginning of the COVID pandemic, I raised the question about why waste a crisis? All of us in life have some sort of personal challenge, some crisis in our lives, some difficulties, some sad news, some bad news. And we have the opportunity, as I heard someone say many years ago, take the lemons of life and make lemonade out of them. And there is a sweetness to our faith if it works, if it's central, if it's valuable, if it's something that we hold on to, and that makes all of the difference in the world. It doesn't mean that it comes like the snap of a finger. Faith is something you have to work at each and every day, each and every moment, however it is that we can find and hold on to that which is our inspiration. And so I think for me, the positive message is for everybody to hang in there, because there's a bright side somewhere. And there's some positive that's going to happen even in the midst of all of the negative things. It may not be what we envision, but how many times have I, in prayer, not gotten what I wanted to or prayed for, but got better than what I wanted to and prayed for? A lot of the stuff is not in our hands anyway. And so we have to put our trust and hope in the one who is above all and in all and through all. That's my message.
Yep. And it's always darkest right before the dawn. So
Yep.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. And Babalawo, you can close us out here with your thoughts, positive message for the future.
Oh, so much. So the one thing, this is no particular order. One thing is that to know, and so I include myself, but I speak to the people listening. Know that you are loved. Know that your ancestors and your relationship to the divine is a place of nourishment, is a place of homecoming, is a place of finding even your place in this world, right? That sense of purpose, that sense of meaning, that place of not knowing. There's so much emphasis on like, I got to get it figured out. If I figure it out, then like things will go well. And like, life is a mystery. We do our best, right? We are engaged in even different practicing. We're like, well, this works. Great. Do we have all the reasons why and all what it's going to lead to? No. But we show up, right? We show up in these relationships that we have, and there are blessings in it, and there's goodness in it, just like a beloved one, right? Our most beloved relationships are not all smooth and easy, but we can lean on the relationship even when it's hard to know that like, oh, they don't really hate me. This is a hard time where they're stressed. And like, so I can remember that love and stay with it a little bit longer. But there's no out there. It's the relationship of our own tender hearts, of our own fragile lives and bodies, which is also really the blessings of this life, right? It's like unfolding, where I'm here in New England. I love New England, and like the seasons, right? The changing that's happening. It's so clear. And that's life. These changes, these transformations, right? As we age, as relationships change, as things come and they go. And even in that, right, there's that relationship that we have, right, to this force that is greater than us, that guides us, that we surrender ourselves to also, that we listen to, that we struggle with, that we rail against, and that we welcome. And that is also like the richness of our existence. I also want to say, in my own practice, there's a more explicit integration of this like spiritual and mental health piece. And I really want to encourage people, like, there are some places where it's like, your spiritual tradition and that practice, yes, deeply rooted, will carry you where you need to go. And there may also need to be some places where you go to a mental health professional, just like you go to the doctor for things, right? And that's important. And that's important for us all as spiritual leaders to remember, as well as, right, these physical and mental health people. You need to understand and create a space that welcomes people's connection to God and their ancestors and the divine and the Orisha and whatever their practices are. Allah, that people's faith practices are integral. And if you don't create space that welcomes it, then you're not seeing the whole person either. And your work cannot hold them. Doesn't mean you have to have it all figured out, but it can't hold them. And so I want to kind of include that piece also. And the last thing, since people are sharing sacred literature, there's a part of this ancestor song, which I'll share the last little bit of. And the translation is, we thank our ancestors for the ashe that they have given to us, right? The authority, the love, right? The tendencies of who we are, right? The blessings that come from them. We thank them for that, and we are using it today. Right? So it's this acknowledgement that who we are is also this wonderful mix as a unique individual, and we come from a people, and we can find those blessings and utilize them and remember that, like, oh, we have tasks to do. We are here for something. And let me not, even in moments of despair and loss and hopelessness, forget that. Whatever can hold us long enough through that to remember, oh, right, I'm here for something. So I'll just sing this last little verse, if that's okay. Ibai gungun tofu washe o. Ibai gungun tofu washe. Ibai gungun tofu washe o. Ibai gungun tofu washe. Ashe te fuan lando yo. Ibai gungun tofu washe. Ibai gungun tofu washe. Ibai gungun tofu washe. Ashe. Amen. Ashe.
Thank you for sharing that. That was lovely. And I want to thank all the panelists today. You guys really brought it, which I appreciate. And I think it was very, very enlightening and very helpful to our audience. So thank you for that. I also want to thank Graciela Reyes from NAMI Elm City and Yale, who helped bring this all together. Thank you, Graciela. And Vanessa from MHTTC for helping run the board and do all the good things behind the scenes that made this possible. So with that, I'm going to let everyone go. And again, thank you all so much, both our attendees for attending today, as well as our panelists. Again, you did a wonderful job, and I really appreciate
pleasure.
it. It's been a pleasure meeting you all. So
Great
be
job.
well, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
God bless.
Blessings.